A rifle misfires on a battlefield because one tiny part doesn't fit any other gun. A cotton mill in 1840 halts for 3 days waiting for a single replacement bolt. A clockmaker in Lyon hand files each screw himself, every thread slightly different from the last. This is not a story about a fastener. This is a story about why identical things had to be invented and what it cost before they were. Look at a screw in your hand. Right now, that spiral ridge winding down a metal shaft. It looks simple. It looks obvious. It looks like it could not possibly have a history worth telling. But before 1860, no two screws in the world were guaranteed to fit the same hole. A bolt made in Birmingham could not thread into a nut made in Sheffield, even in the same decade. Every workshop made its own. Every machine was, quietly, an island. The thread angle, the pitch, the diameter, these were each craftsman's private decision. It meant that when something broke, you didn't replace a part, you remade it from scratch. Think about what that costs in time, in wage hours, in a factory already running behind. The ancient world knew the screw's geometry. Archimedes used the spiral to lift water from rivers. But a water screw is enormous, slow, and turned by hand, nothing like a machine fastener. The threaded metal fastener appears in European armor and clockmaking around the 15th century. Each one filed by hand, each thread cut slowly into soft iron with a crude chasing tool. The clockmaker's workshop in the 1600s smelled of oil, iron, dust, and candle smoke at close range. He might spend 2 hours cutting threads for one small screw, by feel and by eye. That screw belonged to that clock, and no other a bespoke object for a bespoke machine. When the clock broke, you returned it to the same man, or you had a problem. This was the world of craft manufacturing, skilled, slow, deeply personal, and completely unscalable. Then, in the 1700s, something in England began to shift, not dramatically, but structurally. Textile mills needed machines. Machines needed parts. Parts needed to be sourced, moved, and replaced fast. James Watt's steam engines required precise tolerances that hand filing simply could not reliably produce. The constraint was not imagination, it was the inability to make the same thing twice. A screw cut on Monday was not the same as a screw cut on Friday by the same hands. In 1760, Job and William Wyatt in England patented one of the earliest screw-cutting machines. Their machine could cut 50 screws in the time a craftsman finished one, but the threads still varied. The idea was right. The execution was not yet repeatable enough to matter at industrial scale. What was missing was not a machine, it was a standard, a shared agreement about what a screw should be. Here is the mechanism almost nobody explains. A machine without a standard just makes errors faster. Speed without consistency is a different problem, not a solution. For decades, British factories ran on screws that were close but not interchangeable almost, but not quite. Two machines from the same factory could share no parts if they were built 6 months apart. Repair crews carried files as standard tools not to build, but to modify purchased parts on site. That friction cost money, slowed every repair, and quietly capped how large any factory could grow. Then, in 1841, a railway engineer named Joseph Whitworth stood before the Institution of Civil Engineers in London. He had spent years measuring screws from workshops across Britain, collecting them, comparing thread angles and pitches. What he found was not chaos exactly, but something almost worse. Dozens of incompatible local customs. He proposed a single standard, a 5-5-degree thread angle with a defined pitch for each bolt diameter. One number, one angle, one agreement. Quietly, this was one of the hinge moments in industrial history. Whitworth's standard was not a law. It was an invitation, and not everyone accepted it immediately. British railways adopted it first, because a derailed locomotive could not wait 3 days for a filed bolt. Gradually, shipyards followed, then artillery manufacturers, then the broader engineering trade, slowly, workshop by workshop. By the 1860s, the Whitworth thread was common enough in Britain that spare parts began to actually work. A bolt made in Glasgow could now thread into a nut made in London, a quiet revolution in trust. But across the Atlantic, something different was happening, and the divergence would cause problems for the next century. William Sellers, a Philadelphia engineer, looked at Whitworth's 5-5-degree thread and found it unnecessarily difficult to manufacture. In 1864, Sellers proposed a 60-degree angle, slightly sharper, easier to cut with American machine tools of that era. The U.S. Franklin Institute backed him. American railroads adopted it. The two industrial giants now ran on incompatible screws. A British locomotive part shipped to an American repair yard was useless without a machinist standing by with a file. This was not stubbornness, it was the natural result of two industrial systems that had grown separately and fast. Standards, once embedded into thousands of machines and supply chains, become almost impossible to uproot without enormous cost. This is the gear change hidden inside screw history. Standardization solves one problem and immediately creates another kind of lock-in. Once you commit to a thread angle, every lathe, every die, every tap in every workshop is calibrated to it. Changing the standard means replacing not just screws, but the entire ecosystem of tools that make and measure them. The British and American thread systems coexisted awkwardly, expensively through 2 world wars. During World War II, Allied forces discovered that British and American military vehicles could not share fasteners in the field. A mechanic in North Africa with a British wrench and an American bolt had a problem that cost real time. Historians record that this incompatibility slowed certain repairs and added logistical weight to an already strained supply system. After the war, Britain, the United States, and Canada negotiated a compromise. The Unified Thread Standard, finalized around 1949. It split the difference 60 degrees, but with some modifications, close enough for both systems to slowly migrate toward. The full transition took decades. Some industries still carry legacy Whitworth fasteners in older machinery today. Run your hand along the engine block of a vintage British motorcycle, and you may find both thread types present. Now, step back from the politics of standards and look at what the interchangeable screw actually made possible. Before standardized threads, a factory's size was constrained by the skill pool it could physically keep on site. You needed craftsmen who could file, fit, and adjust, not workers who could simply assemble pre-made components. The interchangeable screw, combined with interchangeable parts broadly, changed the unit of production from the craftsman to the system. You could now hire workers with less training, divide the labor into steps, and build at a scale previously impossible. This is sometimes called the American system of manufacturing, and the standardized fastener was its invisible skeleton. A myth worth correcting here. People often credit Eli Whitney with pioneering interchangeable parts through musket manufacturing around 1800. The historical record is more complicated. Whitney's demonstration was partly a showman's performance. True interchangeability came later and more gradually. The actual grind of making parts genuinely identical required decades of improved machine tools, gauges, and yes, agreed-upon screw standards. No single inventor flipped a switch. The system assembled itself through accumulated pressure, failure, and negotiation across generations of engineers. By the early 20th century, the standardized screw had become so embedded in manufacturing that it had disappeared from conscious thought. It became infrastructure like clean water or electricity, noticed only when absent, taken entirely for granted when present. Today, a screw bought at a hardware store in Toronto will fit a bracket assembled in a factory in Vietnam. That quiet compatibility is not accidental. It is the accumulated result of nearly 2 centuries of argument, measurement, and compromise. The metal itself has changed: carbon steel, stainless alloys, titanium in aerospace. But the thread geometry descends directly from those 19th century negotiations. History is layered and disputed here. Some dates and attributions vary depending on the source and the national tradition consulted. What is not disputed is the mechanism. The thing that unlocked modern manufacturing was not the screw itself, but the agreement about it. The object in your wall, in your furniture, in your car door, it carries that agreement silently in its spiral. So, here is the question worth sitting with after this. What other systems around you depend on invisible agreements you have never examined? What works precisely because thousands of people across generations argued until they agreed on one number, one angle, one shape? If this kind of buried history is what you come here for, the mechanism underneath the ordinary object, stay close. The real hidden history of the screw is not about metal. It is about what humans had to agree on to scale anything.